Hey guys, it's me again. In the last video, we talked about Xbox and how they're fucking up and all their messes and blah blah blah. You know, good video. But I did mention a little company known as Sony and how they're not perfect either. And honestly, I'm kind of more disappointed in Sony than I am at Microsoft. Like, I'm going to be honest, Xbox hasn't been the same since the 360. The Xbox One was a garbage console. Like, I'm going to be honest. It was one of the worst consoles, maybe not ever, but it was a pretty bad console. Like, let's not twist it. Like, the Xbox One's the reason Microsoft has fumbled the bag. Almost what? It came out 2013. 11 years later, they still haven't recovered. That's how bad that console was. I know some people might say, "Oh, I love the Xbox One. I loved playing um um yeah, didn't have any games. You know? Wow, I had Halo 5. One of the worst Halos. Perfect. Master Chief Collection? When it came out, the Master Chief Collection was absolutely broken. You couldn't even play multiplayer. They had to give you ODST for free because that's how bad the initial launch of the game was. But now it's great, you know? I love me some Halo. The old Halo. It's not really that 343 crap. And Gears of War. Does anyone still care about Gears of War? Like, honestly. Who plays, like, I know Gears 5 came out, like, back in 2019. But who plays Gears of War now, you know? And Forza, which is Forza. So Xbox isn't really known for their fucking exclusives. Let's be honest. They literally had to go out and buy Bethesda and Activision because they didn't have any games. Sony, on the other hand, they had games. They had the games, you know. They had Bloodborne, one of the greatest. We're still waiting for that 60 FPS patch or PC port for some reason. But, you know, Sony can go out and remaster, remake, redo, blah, 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 Last of Us for the upteenth million time. But we can't get anything with Bloodborne. But, okay, more Last of Us. Great. But the PS4 generation, man, that was something special because we were getting games after games after games. I know when it first initially came out, the exclusive lineups or the games weren't that great. You know, they were coming, like, it was a pretty slow burn. Like, yeah, we had, like, the launch titles weren't really great. And then we had Infamous Second Son in, like, March. And I believe after that, we didn't really have much for the rest of the year. But then once 2015 came and Bloodborne came, like, Bloodborne, that carries that generation. Bloodborne's probably the best game of that generation. Let's be honest. And I'm gonna be honest. I'm a From Software fanboy, so like, of course, Bloodborne's probably is my favorite, arguably one of my favorite exclusives. And even then, there were so many other great exclusives that came out. Until Dawn, I know people love that game. We had Last Guardian. I believe that was 2016, and we had Gravity Rush 2, Uncharted 4. So many other games that I can't just list from the top of my head. Um, it was just overall a great generation. You know, Sony came in and they were swinging. They realized how much of the console market share they lost from that seventh generation. Because remember, look, I love the PS3. Honestly, the PS3 is probably one of my favorite consoles of all time. But that first couple years was rough. Like, they were getting destroyed by the Wii and Xbox. And it wasn't looking good. But then they managed to turn around, and I believe they caught up with Xbox. They either slightly outsold it or they're like matched. I believe they slightly outsold the 360. So they knew they didn't want to make the mistakes of the PS3 for the PS4. And man, I still remember that E3 when they absolutely destroyed Microsoft. When they were like, "Oh, by the way, the PS4, $399." And man, that pretty much confirmed who's winning this generation. And dude, they continued swinging throughout. They were partnering up with all kinds of like studios. They had their big AAAs, they had their AA games, and it was it was like, man, we were getting games all the time from Sony. And now PS5, we haven't really been getting any games. I know that we did well, I'll be honest. This year we did have 7 Rebirth, Helldivers 2, Stellar Blade, and Rise of Ronin. 7 Rebirth, love that game, but let's be honest, it's going to come to PC and other consoles probably soon, especially with the news that Square Enix is done with like doing exclusive titles, like kind of with Sony, that they're probably just going to stick with multi-platform. Yeah, but I'll say Stellar Blade, loved Stellar Blade. It's my game of the year. Rise of Ronin, pretty good. Helldivers 2, everyone loves Helldivers 2. But for some reason, last year we literally had like no games. Final Fantasy 16, yes. But that's going to be coming out soon to PC and other consoles. And let's be honest, Sony kind of just paid for that exclusivity. From Sony themselves, all we got is Spider-Man 2. And the reason I call it Spider-Man 2, because man, that game was fucking mid. Like, man, I don't know how you can go from the amazing game that is Insomniac's Spider-Man, the first 2018 game, to that. Like, man, I was so hyped for this game because, I loved the Spider-Man Insomniac games. I loved Spider-Man, the 2018 title, and Miles Morales. So, I had pretty high expectations for this game. And then it came out. And man, I swear, Insomniac doesn't listen. I remember back in the 2018 game, we were like, no more Mary Jane missions. We do not like those missions. They fucking kill the pace. They are horrible. But I thought they listened, but I thought they were doing a good job after that. They listened to us. The DLCs, well, the later DLCs, I believe the first one did have Mary Jane missions, but the later DLCs got rid of that. It was pure Spider-Man. And then Miles Morales came out, and guess what? You only played as Miles the entire game. Perfect. You weren't forced to have these Mary Jane-esque missions with other characters, whatever. It was just a Miles story. You played as Spider-Man from start to finish. So, with that, you'd assume that, hey, Spider-Man 2's coming out, 2 Spider-Man. We're probably just going to be playing as these 2 Spider-Man, right? Nope. Instead, they brought in Mary Jawline fucking Watson over there with her fucking stealth missions again and forced it down our throat once again, even though we told them, don't do that again. We get it. You want to try something different the first time? Just don't do it again. But they did it again. And then they also introduced like other stupid ass missions. Like the amount of fucking like slow down missions they have in that game where you play as Peter Parker walking around as a normal dude with his friends. I'm like, man, okay, that's cool. But can you just have that as a cutscene? Why do I have to play that? I want to play as Spider-Man. I didn't play Peter Parker and friends. I want to play Spider-Man. And the amount of just BS in that game. Like, also, why do we play as Miles' deaf girlfriend? Like, why? Like, I want to play Spider-Man, not his deaf girlfriend. And I'm just sitting there like, bro, what? What is this game? And also, it's just like, that game just felt like, at first I actually like decently liked it, but then the more that time went on, I was just like, I'm really not a fan of it. And then when the new Game of Plus came out, I tried playing it again, and I'm just like, I'm not really feeling it. So that game, not great. And honestly, the PlayStation 5 generation hasn't been the greatest. Sony already said that we're in the later half of its console life cycle, and we're still getting cross-gen PS4 games. Like, what? How are we in the halfway mark, but we're still getting games for the previous generation console? Hell, 2022, the biggest PS5 games, God of War, Horizon, Gran Turismo 7, we're all on the PlayStation 4. 2 years into the console life cycle, we were still on the PS4. And I'm just like sitting there like, what? Like when we went from the from the PS3 to the PS4, Sony immediately dropped the PS3. They didn't release any like exclusives for the I don't think they released any exclusives for the PS3. They might have, but most of their big games, PlayStation 4 exclusive. Infamous Second Son. That wasn't on the PS3. You know what it was on? PS4. You want to play that game? You needed a PS4. And they were just releasing games after games after games. And even partnering up with smaller developers to release like smaller budget games. Something Sony might be trying to do again after with the success of games like Stellar Blade. Because, I will say Stellar Blade, I don't think it's like as big as a Spider-Man 2 or God of War Ragnarok. But honestly, I like that game better than most of those. But they want to make these big AAA games that take 8 years to make. And I'm just like, I bought this console for your exclusives, and I want these exclusives in a timely manner. I'm not saying to rush them, but lower the scope, make a AA game, like the PS4 generation. Like, we had games like Gravity Rush 2, or Terraway Unfolded, games like those that are smaller in budget, and were still great games. And they came out in a timely manner, so I can, instead of just waiting 5 years for the big AAA game, in that period of time, I had those AA games to play. And it's just like, what's going on, Sony? Like, especially when it comes to remastering. I know some people don't really like the remaster remake trend, but I'm fine with it when it's from a console that's unaccessible through modern means. Like, for example, I was fine when the Switch had Wii U games because no one owned a Wii U. I didn't fucking own a Wii U. No one else did. The Switch outsold the Wii U in its first year. So when they got Wii U game, I'm like, fucking cool. These are new games. I didn't play these games, and I couldn't even play those games even if I wanted to because the Switch had no Wii U backwards compatibility. So the PS5, they tried that again. You know what they did? They remade one PS3 games as in Demon's Souls. Great. I loved the Demon's Souls remake. But you know what else they did? They started remastering PS4 games. Mind you, the PS5 is fully backwards compatible. We can play these games on the PS5. Why waste your time remastering these PS4 games when there's so many games stuck on the PS3 that the only way we could play it on the PS5 is through cloud streaming? I don't want to use cloud streaming. I want to play natively. Like, why do I need it? Why does The Last of Us Part 2 need it remastered when the game was already updated for 60 FPS on PlayStation 5? It already received a 60 FPS patch. But you want to sell the remastered? Oh man, and let's not start with Last of Us 1. We already had it remastered on the PS4. And you know what they decided to do? Remake it on the PS5. I'm like, bro, Bloodborne is sitting right there. All I just want is a 60 FPS patch. But what do you want to do is resell me The Last of Us again? The Last of Us has more re-releases than it does actual games in its series. There's only 2 Last of Us games and 3 remastered / remakes. And I'm just like, what are you doing? You have a bunch of games on the PS3 generation that I would love just to get ports, just straight up PS5 ports. Like all of the God of War, dude, you can't even play most of the God of War games on the PS5. The earliest you can play is God of War 3, the end of the Greece saga. How are people who just got into God of War with the newer games going to play these older games besides cloud streaming? They can't. They got to when they're playing God of War 2018 and Ragnarok, and there's mentions of the Greece era, they probably won't really get it because they are unable to play most of the Greek games. And that's just one part of it. Sony's obsession with these big AAA games are causing them not to release any games. And I'm just like, Sony, just please release something, just release games. Doesn't have to be the biggest games. Smaller budget games are great. I love smaller budget games. And it's just so disappointing when you see something like the Switch getting constant stream of games from Nintendo in its last few years of its life. Like, I know some people are talking about how the Switch this year isn't really getting that many games, but the Switch 2 is supposed to come out probably next year. I'm not 100% sure, but it probably is. The Switch, it's fine for it to not have that many games in its last year of life, especially when the previous years they were constantly putting out games, great games after great games. Well, the PS5 they announced pretty much that. Well, I'm pretty sure they announced that we're in the last part of its life. We're at the halfway point of the PS5. We're supposed to get the PS5 Pro later this year, and the PS5's been out for almost 4 years now. And the games lineup for that console has been barren. And I really hope Sony manages to turn things around, start putting more games, start working with these smaller publishers and developers to hey, make exclusives. Hey, you go to like a smaller developer and be like, hey, we'll publish your game. Just let us help you out. And I know they've been doing that with games like Stellar Blade and Rise of Ronin. Please do more of that. I loved those games. Like, just make sure the consumers is happy with the games they're getting. Make sure that I feel like I'm glad that I bought a PS5 because so far, well, honestly, had my PS5 for what, a year, and honestly, I feel like I played most of the games I would want to play on it. And I don't think that's something that happened with the PS4. The PS4, I was like 3 years in, I'm like, man, there's still so many games I still haven't played on this. But the PS5, no. I'm sorry, Sony, you really need to step up your game. You need to start releasing some games.